Welcome back to my podcast, Grief the Real Talk. In today's episode, I'm talking about losing our identities when losing a spouse. Everything changes. They say grief changes us. That's a fact. But how does it change us? We live two as one, then separated like one twin taken away from the other. How could this monumental event not change everything in our world and daily living? Everything changes when our loved one dies. In a flash, from the pan of the anticipatory grief, we're then swallowed right into our fears of loss as the finality of our loss sets in. Many of us suffer the anticipating grief of our loved one's impending demise before we even enter the final grief stage, all while trying to stay sane while caring for our loved one, as was my case. I was numb and in covert shock when I realized I was going to lose my husband. And when I finally faced the end and reality, it was like waking up from the aftermath of an apocalypse. That's just how it felt. For so long, there was no me. I had no time for that. All my love and focus was for my husband. I couldn't even allow my brain to fathom the fact he was dying, even though I knew he was. Or I could not possibly look after him if I allowed myself to go into that dark place of wondering what was to come. How did I go from being a loving wife to a caregiver in a flash? Unable to even allow myself to think of the new solo role I would and have become, of becoming a widow. Completely on her own now, with a missing part of myself. The loss of a spouse will inevitably change our lives. When we become that solo act instead of a couple, everything changes. Grief is also the loss of life for us, our life as we knew it, the survivors, left alone behind. We must grieve that too, the loss of our love, of entwined lives, and the loss of our us, which just piles onto our already heavy load of grief. As we begin to digest our world has taken a 180, and that we are now responsible for everything in and for our own lives, the reality hits that there is nobody to share our life with. It's overwhelming. Our living situation, our financials, even some of our abilities come into play for the many things we relied on having from our spouse, on top of the grief of the aftermath. Is it any wonder how some just can't function the same anymore? My wardrobe became insignificant. I no longer required all the fancy clothes worn for our social life. That too disappeared. I moved to lessen the rent and to run away from where he died. And with that, I gave away half of our life possessions and my husband's toys and treasures. Probably because I was living in disbelief, zombie mode, and had to keep moving forward without stopping to rest, or I'd go numb if I let my thoughts catch up to me. This was immediate transformation I had to do before even digesting my new life. As I packed up our life together and moved into a smaller place, all done in just 2.5 months after my husband's passing. Done while not even comprehending everything else I lost when I lost my husband. Welcome to all the new fears of living alone that slowly creep up on us daily as we venture to do something that was once so familiar and taken for granted. Eating alone, sleeping alone, shopping and cooking for one, no confidant to have dialogue with, new worries about things like our own health, wondering who will take care of us should we become sick. I have no children of ours to grow older with. Another realization that bites into my now solo life saddled with a broken heart. And these are just a few to mention that add to the insurmountable grief we carry. Everything changes. If we think we're prepared for all these awakenings, we just are not. Grief becomes the instigator of much of how we feel on a daily basis. It dictates to our sadness when we become that one from two and takes a place in much of what we do. Grief hits like the menopause. Our world changes in a blink and it hits us all differently. But the same losses and changes will apply to us all. You can't compare griefs. Each one of us will carry it differently, yet it will suffocate us the same. So despite our hurting and trying to move on with our now new lives, we have to learn to do or redo things in life again by ourselves. I know from experience how my loss has exacerbated my anxieties. Driving is a big one for me, as I get high anxiety with traffic-laden streets. My husband was the driver and I was the navigator. Now I'm having no choice but to summon up courage every time I must drive somewhere out of my comfort perimeters, especially highways. I strive to overcome my fears so I don't imprison myself, because I'm not yet ready to have my wings clipped. So I have no choice but to step up to my fears. Yes, everything changes. Did I mention that? Death of a loved one changes everything from our desires or lack of them to the views on our life to our new fears. Our wants change and often dissipate, our routines and lifestyle and our diets change. Even friendships change when you're no longer a couple. When we transform from an us to becoming one. It's not surprising our world changes and the way we see things and are seen. I always cooked healthy 3-course meals for me and my husband. After his passing, I found myself loving my air fryer. Heating up quick chicken and whatever vegetables I had in the fridge became as much as I could muster. My joy of cooking left when my man did. Eating is now only something I do to exist. Eating alone has become a short session without conversation. No lingering at the table after a meal, just a plate in the dishwasher and a pot to wash, and it's done. Inevitably, our life will take on that new path. With the grief in the way, it can be challenging on many days, as I know so well. But despite my grief making me feel like I don't want to do anything, I push myself to do things. When you barely have any family left and your friends don't live close enough to come by often enough, we have to make an effort to get out and do things and commune with other human beings. If we don't belong to any clubs, hobbies, or groups, we need to find something we like to do. This too can be difficult because when we are grieving, we sometimes don't feel the energy or desire to do anything, but we must. I at least keep my mind occupied with my writing. My writing has saved what's left of my sanity and has done many times in my life. I highly recommend journaling as a great therapy to help get the words out of our heads and onto paper. But I digress. Writing, although a creative job, it's a sedentary job that requires us to get up, out of our chairs, and do a bit of exercise so we don't stiffen up. So I joined a gym, mostly for the classes and human interaction, to have something scheduled that I commit to do, especially when I'm paying for it, which is motivating in itself. I go 3 times a week for a class, do some resistance training, and half an hour on the treadmill, which affords me that time to indulge in a book I'm reading. The intent is to get out, get in better health, and possibly make some new friends while out. But admittedly, I couldn't even think about joining anything until after a year of overwhelming grief stifled me. Grief never goes away. The harder we loved, the longer we will grieve. So if we don't want to be eternally swallowed up by it, we eventually must make an effort to live instead of just exist. Grief is a new companion I still struggle to live with. I still struggle with learning how to tame the beast while taking strides to find an easier way to live with it. Even in this difficult battle within, we need to remember to give a little attention to ourselves and find some activities we enjoy, to help ourselves fill some of the void within, and just maybe some great benefits will come along with this new endeavor. Our grief will never leave us. It will move forward with us wherever we go, but hopefully, within time and getting busier, we will eventually learn to carry our grief in a smaller suitcase. We are different people now, having to find a new way of living, and hopefully down the road, we'll find things that not only keep us busy, but bring some joy back into our lives again. Thank you for listening, and next time I'll be talking about external relationships that change after losing a spouse. I hope you will join me.